Yeah! I've got you right where I want you, Terminated scum. What are you doing there, little Jimmy? Oh, hi there, Grandfather. I'm playing with my Super Earth approved Super Destroyer toy that my dad got me for Super Earth Day. Well, I think it's time I take over your playtime with a story about my past. Do you want to hear about my Super Destroyer when I was a Helldiver? Oh boy, do I! Story time with Grandfather! Kids, gather around. It's time to learn about the greatest technological advancement in Super Earth history. Oh my god, Billy! I can't believe you escaped the bears just in time to hear this story. Welcome back! Well, you sure did a whole lot to save me, you piece of... Whoa there, little Billy. What did your dad say about using that kind of language? You left me to be eaten by bears! Shut up, little Billy. Those bears are vegetarian. A short interruption for black bear facts with Nate. It may sound absurd, but black bears actually have a primarily vegetarian diet. According to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, black bears eat 73% plants, 22% insects, and only 5% animal matter. Still, do not pet the black bears even though they are friend-shaped. They are very vicious and territorial when provoked. Anyways, returning to our regularly scheduled programming. Back when I was a younger man, I was in the Super Earth Defense Force as a Helldiver, and I had my own Super Destroyer all to myself to help spread managed democracy. But what kind of weapons does a Super Destroyer have? What kind of technological advancements did humanity pack into these? And finally, what does the Super Destroyer say about Super Earth society? Let's start out with the history of the Super Destroyer and who made it. Now, what we officially know from Arrowhead Studios is... not much. So, with nothing confirmed, I'm just gonna make some, let's call them educated guesses here. The space probe New Horizons was launched on normal Earth in 2006, and it is well on its way out of our solar system now. And we're just gonna say that New Horizons here ran into the Illuminate. Humans saw that, they're like, oh my god, there's aliens out there. We gotta put guns on these spaceships immediately. Because we could not possibly let those dastardly aliens chill there peacefully over in the corner of our galaxy. We gotta get rid of them. So humanity got quickly to work on building something to fight these aliens that they found out in space. And somewhere in the middle there, some, war happened on Earth and turned it into Super Earth, and there were some governmental changes. We're not gonna cover those today. Stuff happened, we're where we are now. But in that time as well, they developed some fantastically powerful weapons. Like the Super Destroyer, they finally honed in and they made this work of art here. Because what's the only thing that can pull humanity together to develop something better than fighting aliens? Fighting ourselves. Grandfather, I don't care about history. Tell me about the features of the Super Destroyer. Jimmy, when the hell did you get so tall? It turns out if no one hits the like button on this video, I start to get spaghettified. That's right, everyone. You heard Jimmy. If you don't like the video, he'll keep getting his resolution stretched until he is just a 1 pixel wide piece of spaghetti on the screen. And if you want to help with Jimmy's unspaghettification surgery, consider hitting that subscribe button, as it supports not only me, but little Jimmy here. It's okay, Jimmy. I'll tell you all the specifics of the Super Destroyer before you turn into spaghetti. So we can't move on to the specifics of the Super Destroyer without first covering the basics. The name itself. Super Destroyer is not the official name for this vessel. The official name is the Class 6 Series Crewed Interplanetary Combat Vessel. But no one's yelling that when they're trying to find these in the parking lot. They're yelling Super Destroyer. According to Wikipedia, the Super Destroyer is a relatively small combat vessel at approximately 170 meters long and 80 meters wide, which to me sitting here sounds pretty darn big and not small at all. But doing a little quick research, the newest aircraft carrier in the US Navy's arsenal, the Gerald R. Ford class carrier, is 333 meters long. So that puts the Super Destroyer here at about half the size of an aircraft carrier in the modern world. So I guess you could say it is relatively small, especially when you look at the spaceships of other space franchises, like let's say Star Wars, where the Imperial Star Destroyer is 1.6 kilometers long. Yeah, this is pretty small. And relatively small here raises a question. Is there bigger ships in the Super Earth Navy? Do they have maybe like super battleships? Or if we stick with the super naming scheme, a Super Destroyer, and you keep adding supers for however big they are? And I've said super so much in this video already, it doesn't sound like a real word anymore, and we're only like 2 minutes in. Oh my god. But let's talk about the most important part of the Super Destroyer here. How it travels faster than light. In the Wikipedia here, it says it uses the Albuquerque... No, that's not it. Alcubierre? Hold on. Alright, let's see how Google here says to pronounce this.
Alcubierre.
Alcubierre. That makes much more sense. Now, I thought this Alcubierre drive here was just a fun name the developers gave for the warp drive to make it sound cool, but no. It is actually a real theoretical warp drive, which sounds weird saying real and theoretical next to each other, but scientific research is weird too. But Miguel Alcubierre in 1994 proposed this type of warp travel that could break the laws of physics and travel faster than light. And honestly, this theory is so fascinating that I may just make a video about it later on, so I'm not going to get too into the weeds in this one here. But to give you the super quick overview, Miguel here proposed that if you change the geometry of space itself by creating a wave in front of the spacecraft, and then allow you to expand back behind the spacecraft, this could propel you faster than light, which is cool. And major props to developers for throwing in a fun little Easter egg like this of a theoretical warp technology, instead of just saying, the ships travel by the power of super-managed democracy or something like that. And this Alcubierre drive here is said to be powered by element 710, which may sound familiar, because if you flip 710 upside down, it's just oil, and it's the material that comes from the Terminids when they're squished down into a little bit of goo. But the Super Destroyer doesn't need to always warp travel. Sometimes it needs to be in a planet and just correct slightly and move around the battlefield. And for that, it has 10 large engines on the back of the ship. 6 in the middle here, and 2 on each of the outer wings. And why this specific configuration of engines? It's more likely than not the 6 in the center are meant for moving forward, and 2 on either side are meant for turning the ship. Now, before we move inside the Super Destroyer here, there's one last thing I want to talk about the exterior. You'll notice all the weapons are collected towards this front area, and very specifically, none of them are on the top of the ship. This implies something very interesting. Whoever designed the Super Destroyer was not planning on fighting other ships in space. Everything is facing down towards a planet. If the designers of the ship were expecting threats from, say, other extraterrestrial spacecraft that are not human in nature, they would have had some weaponry on top. If they were trying to deal with bigger ships from the aliens, they would have had big cannons like the Factory Striders had. If they were trying to deal with fighters, they would have had little turrets like you see on Star Wars ships, but we don't see any of that here. Meaning the Super Destroyer here is meant purely as a ground attack spaceship. All this is meant to do is bombard planets. And this again raises a question about something I mentioned earlier. Are there other ship classes in the Super Earth Defense Force Navy? Because if this is the only ship they have, the bugs aren't building spaceships. We know that. There's not weird little buggy spaceships flying around with giant bug guns on them. That's not happening. But the bots, or the Illuminate, especially the Illuminate, certainly have spaceships come fight humanity. So it's very interesting that there's no spaceship-to-spaceship weapon on the Super Destroyer here. I think this heavily implies that there's other classes of ship in the Super Earth Navy. Probably something much bigger that's meant for space combat, to take out those threats. And this here is purely the ground attack craft. Now, that's enough about the very pretty exterior of the ship, which is mighty fine looking, I must say. Let's move on to the interior of the ship, and talk about the most important part of the ship. Now, you may think it's the hangar, because it's got all the weapons, or maybe it's the command center, because that's where you call in the stratagems from. No. It's the Helldiver freezer. We need to talk about where the Helldivers come from. When a mommy Helldiver loves a daddy Helldiver. Wait, sorry, went a little far back in the Helldiver life cycle. They're frozen. They're unfrozen on the ship. But that leads to an interesting point. Why are they frozen? Every Helldiver, after they finish training and are ready to go, are being told they're being put in charge of a Super Destroyer. They're going to be cryogenically frozen, and then they'll be unthawed when their ship is needed. But that's interesting, because the Super Destroyers have a lot of Helldivers on them, which raises a very interesting point. Who's really in control of them? That's right, I'm suggesting the first highly treasonous thing of this episode here. Helldivers are told they're put in charge of their own Super Destroyer. This is theirs to command. But what's interesting is, there's millions of Helldivers. Does Super Earth really have the resources to build millions of Super Destroyers? I highly doubt it. I think here's what really happens. The Helldiver is not in control of the ship. The Democracy Officer is. They're the one flying it around, they're the one going where they're needed. And once they need to drop some Helldivers, they unfreeze the Helldiver, say, "Welcome to your command, sir. Get in the helipod and go down to the planet." And they go down there and, more likely than not, explode to a robot or something, and hey, you just unfreeze the next Helldiver and say, "Welcome to your command, sir. Get on down in there." And you repeat and repeat and repeat. This is much more realistic than Super Earth making millions of Super Destroyers. But man, does this reveal a dark truth about the Super Earth government and the Helldivers program, because they tell the Helldivers trainees, you're going to be in command, you're going to go fight for managed democracy. They freeze them up, they stock the ships full of them, and they just send them off to go be cannon fodder, essentially. They aren't the super soldiers, they aren't the heroes, they're just another soldier. But hey, that's enough incredibly depressing lore about the Helldivers universe. Let's talk about the hangar where the Pelican and the Eagle are stored. That's right, you've got everyone's favorite stratagem stored here. You want an exosuit? Pelican 1's coming to bring it in from the hangar right here. You need a 500 kg bomb? Well, guess what? Eagle's arming one right now and coming into the battlefield from right here in the hangar. And a cool thing they've added to the Super Destroyer here, as you upgrade areas like the hangar and the weapons, new things actually show up in your ship for you to see. Like if you upgrade the hangar, the Eagle actually shows up. At level 1, you don't see it. Later on, you do. And more bombs get thrown around, other weapons, and I think this is supposed to kind of happen in line with as you unlock the stratagems, like, oh man, I unlocked the 500 kg, and they're hoping that you unlock the upgraded weapons bay, and then, hey, look, it's in the weapons bay now. Personally, I got the 500 kg way before I actually collected enough samples to get that upgraded weapons bay, but cool feature all the same. And there's one other interesting thing you'll notice about the hangar here. It's not that big. There's one Pelican in there, one Eagle. You could maybe fit a second Eagle in front of that first one, but that's about it. This implies something really interesting. It means the designers for Super Earth here really weren't expecting the Pelicans or Eagles to get shot down much, otherwise they would have extras around. Which raises a couple possibilities. First, as I mentioned earlier, there might be other classes of spaceships in the Super Earth Defense Force Navy. Maybe there's a carrier to deal with resupplying the Super Destroyers with new fighters and whatnot, or just it directly provides Eagle support. Or, and I have not mentioned this one yet, the designers of Super Earth are just really brash, and they, see what I did there? See, brash, sorry. They're really brash, and they just think, no, the enemies couldn't possibly shoot down our craft, that'll never happen, and they just didn't bother designing to have replacements around, which is quite possible, considering, you know, the fever of managed democracy. Moving our way forward in the Super Destroyer here, we've got what I like to call the Super Destroyer living room, because it's got a TV, it's got an arcade machine, it's even got a computer to order stuff off of managed democracy Amazon. And most importantly here, you have your ship's master, who you can talk to and says vaguely encouraging words. But since on the computer here for Space Amazon, you can also order ship upgrades, I want to dig into that a little bit. How could this work in the Helldivers lore? Why is it that they have all these upgrades for ships, but they don't bother putting them on there straight out of the factory? That again leads to the idea that they don't have the resources to really be making these ships as fast as they do, and they want to see, alright here, which ship is the most successful, let's give them the better weapons. And this is a comment about the Helldivers that are on the ship, because obviously, if they're bringing back samples and whatnot, they're surviving their missions and completing them, but also a comment on the Democracy Officer who I believe is leading this ship. That's right, Super Earth is not testing the Helldivers. I mean, sure, they're plenty happy when they complete the mission and come back alive and bring back little trinkets and bobs from it and whatnot. But they want to see how successful is the Democracy Officer that's probably leading these vessels. How well can they complete missions? Can they keep up a good complement of Helldivers and keep them from getting killed too often? Can they call in stratagems well? Who should we give the upgraded weapons? Because we can't give them to everyone, so we got to give these better weapons to someone who's earned it. Because again, even though Super Earth controls numerous planets, they more likely than not do have the resources to fully kit out every ship they make. There's going to be some that don't do well, and they're not going to give them better weapons, because you know what? They're not doing that well anyways. Just let them go out there and flounder around. But speaking of floundering around, let's get into the Helldivers gear that they flounder around on, because the next area in the ship is where you pick up all your equipment. You can get guns, armor, change all that out, change your loadouts and whatnot, and that's really about it for here. This is just where your Helldiver can get dressed, basically. Get ready for battle. And then we move on to the brain of our Super Destroyer here, the Command Center, the bridge, where we've got our friendly local democracy officer, who, by the way, more likely than not, is in charge of the ship and is actually the captain and controls every mission you go on and the Helldivers and what they do. But this is where you have your giant global map, you can select missions. And you may notice when you're selecting missions, it doesn't let you go to places that are already liberated. And that's interesting, because if you're in command of this ship, you should be able to go wherever you feel you can help manage democracy the best. Which again leads to the idea that the democracy officers actually control out there saying, okay, yeah, you can go wherever you go, but it's got to be somewhere there's a fight going on and we can actually do something useful. And even more than that, the democracy officer likes to press you where they feel like they should go with major orders and say, hey, this is where we're really needed. We got to go here now. And most Helldivers will probably listen. Some will not, and they'll go off and do whatever they want. But you know what? Once that Helldiver's done with their mission, the democracy officer can pilot the ship right back to where they're actually needed. And this is another fascinating example of how the Helldivers are made to feel special so that they fight better and they're more effective, when in reality, they're just a basic soldier. And if we're to keep moving any further forward in the ship, we actually need to go outside the ship. But there is something fun outside the ship in front here. All of the weapons. So to get in quick, which weapons are on the Super Destroyer here, or can be on the Super Destroyer once they're actually given to it, we've got all the stratagems you use in the game. You've got the Atlas Cannon, the first one you get, which uses gas, EMS, and air burst shells. You've got the Gatling Gun, you got the 120 and 380 millimeter artillery, you've got the orbital laser, and you've got the rail cannon. And let's talk about how the Super Destroyer uses these weapons. During the mission, your super destroyer will sit at an altitude roughly 1 kilometer directly above the center of your map, which is why you'll notice if you're calling in artillery strikes and you're way on the edge of the map, they come at kind of an arc, and tall mountains and stuff can even block them. And this here actually kind of explains why your super destroyer has to leave you at the end of the mission. You may be thinking, why can't it just sit up there and infinitely shoot things at the bugs for me? Well, it's using its engines to keep from crashing into the planet, because 1 kilometer above is well within the gravitational pull of the planet, and it needs to get some time to go to recharge those engines, so it doesn't crash. Oh, and one last final little thing, little bit of treason statement to finish out this video. Another note that kind of proves that Democracy Officer is the one really in charge of the ship here. If you leave the mission area, they call down a traitor bombardment on you, and they will not stop until you're destroyed. If you were truly in charge of the Super Destroyer, and it should probably be your word to say, hey, this is how we're going to help manage democracy, I need to go over here. Now, if they say no, it's probably the Democracy Officer in charge. Anyways. So if you enjoyed this deep dive into the Super Destroyer that everyone uses and loves, I'd love if you consider hitting that like button down below and hitting the subscribe button to stay tuned for more. It really is the best way to support my channel. Thanks, and I'll see you guys next time.